Do you know the prayer to Saint Michael the Archangel? The one that asks for protection against the snares of the devil? It wasn't born by chance. It was born from a vision that made a pope tremble. And according to trustworthy accounts, it revealed a spiritual battle so intense that hell itself asked for permission to act. And God allowed it. This story took place in the very heart of the Vatican. At the end of a regular mass in front of cardinals and priests, Pope Leo XIII suddenly stopped. His face turned pale. His eyes lost focus. He didn't faint, but no one dared to approach him. For nearly 10 minutes he stood completely still, staring at the altar. When he came back to himself, he gave an immediate order. A prayer had to be written. He dictated it with unsettling clarity and insisted it should be prayed after every Mass. It was not a suggestion. It was an order. And it was urgent. What he saw in that moment remained a secret for many years. But later on, priests close to him revealed what had happened, and what they described would forever change the way the Church saw its own history. According to their account, Leo XIII heard a conversation coming from the altar. It wasn't a sermon. It was a confrontation, a challenge. Satan was standing before God, asking for a chance to destroy the Church, asking for time, asking for power. And God allowed it. He said, "I grant you the time and the power. Do with them what you will." Upon hearing this, Leo XIII saw images, glimpses of the future, churches in ruins, priests being persecuted, faith being mocked, the throne of Peter under threat, and at the center of it all, Satan manipulating hearts through pride, lust, and deception. The vision ended with an intense light, and in the midst of that light, the Archangel Michael stood with his sword raised, casting the enemy back into the abyss. That vision gave birth to the famous prayer, "Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle." But what few people know is that Pope Leo didn't believe it was just a symbol. He believed he had witnessed the beginning of a countdown, that the time granted to the enemy had already begun. And if he was right, then perhaps now, more than a century later, we are approaching the end of that time. And that is what has led many believers, scholars, and even clergy to ask themselves, why now? Why is it now, just as a new pope ascends to the throne of Peter, that strange signs are returning? Why is the prayer to Saint Michael being fervently revived in parishes across the world? And most importantly, could the forgotten prophecy of Pope Leo XIII be about to unfold? If you're appreciating this content, leave a like now and subscribe to the channel. It helps us keep telling these stories, stories that history tried to bury. When Pope Leo XIII described his vision, there was no room for allegory. He didn't say it was a dream or a symbolic thought or a theological insight. He said it happened. He claimed to have heard the words with his own ears. He claimed to have seen the exchange. And what shook him most was not the presence of Satan, but the response of God. Because according to his account, God said yes. The permission was granted. But permission for what? And for how long? Some believe the time granted was 100 years. Others argue the duration was never explicitly revealed, but its consequences, they say, are now impossible to ignore. Because since that moment, the world has not been the same. Think about it. The 20th century alone witnessed the most violent and spiritually turbulent events in all of human history. 2 world wars, the rise of totalitarian regimes, genocide, the Cold War, nuclear fear, cultural revolutions that aimed to erase the sacred, and scandals that reached deep into the heart of the Church itself. All of it unfolding like pieces of a slow-moving but unstoppable plan. Not an external assault, but an internal corrosion, as if something, some force, were allowed to infiltrate the deepest structures of faith, thought, and morality. And at the center of this storm, the Catholic Church. She stood, she suffered, she stood again. The prayer to Saint Michael the Archangel, composed by Leo XIII immediately after his vision, was once a daily shield, recited after every Mass by faithful Catholics across the globe. But after the Second Vatican Council, it quietly disappeared from the official liturgy. Some said it was no longer needed, that it belonged to an older, more fearful church. Others, especially exorcists and mystics, warned that this was a grave mistake, that in stepping away from the battle, we had lowered our guard. Their voices, however, were mostly ignored, until the signs returned. In recent decades, something has shifted. A quiet but powerful movement has begun to reawaken. More and more parishes have reintroduced the prayer to Saint Michael after Mass. More and more priests have begun speaking openly about spiritual warfare, not as a metaphor, but as a reality. Stories of possessions, demonic influences, and dark phenomena have increased, and, perhaps more importantly, Catholics, especially young Catholics, have begun rediscovering the seriousness of the battle. Because somewhere deep in the soul of the Church, there is a growing awareness. The war never ended. We just forgot we were in it. And now, a new chapter begins. A new pope sits on the throne of Peter. His name is Robert Francis Prevost, American, Augustinian, known not for dramatic gestures but for his quiet strength and clarity. A man of listening, but also of boundaries. He doesn't seek popularity. He doesn't speak to please. And for many observers, that's exactly why his presence matters now. There are whispers that his election was not just administrative, that it was providential. Some say he represents a quiet shift, a correction, of course. Others believe he is the bridge between what was and what must be. But almost no one is talking about the timing, about the atmosphere that surrounds his arrival, because it's not marked by celebration, nor controversy, nor triumph. It's marked by something heavier, a strange silence, the kind of silence that comes just before a battle begins. And if Pope Leo XIII was right, if the time given to the enemy was limited, then perhaps that time is nearing its end. And perhaps this moment, this exact generation, is the one called to witness its final act. But it won't be fought with swords. It won't be decided by votes or politics. This battle is spiritual, and the battleground is the human heart. It will be won by prayer, by sacrifice, by holiness, and like in every war between light and darkness, indifference will be the enemy's greatest weapon. When Pope Leo XIII wrote the prayer to Saint Michael, he wasn't crafting a gentle spiritual reflection. He was issuing a call to arms, a battle cry for the invisible war. He knew exactly what he was doing. That prayer was a shield and a sword. Each word was placed with intention, sharpened by the urgency of what he had seen. And in the final line, he delivered the warning that has echoed for generations. And you, O Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, cast into hell Satan and all the evil spirits who prowl about the world seeking the ruin of souls. He didn't say, hide in the shadows. He said they prowl about the world. He didn't mean it as symbolism or poetic imagery. He meant it literally. These spirits were not confined to legends or ancient fears. They were active, restless, and soon they would be present in ways humanity wasn't prepared to see. He was telling the Church, the enemy will walk among us, not in grotesque form, but veiled in ideologies that confuse rather than clarify. embedded in movements that promise freedom while delivering chains, hidden inside distractions so constant they deaden the soul, and perhaps most dangerously, dwelling even in the folds of the sacred, corrupting what was once pure. That is why Pope Leo invoked Michael, not simply as a protector, but as a commander in battle. He knew the coming war wouldn't look like the ones before. It would not be waged with swords or fire. It would be waged in minds, in liturgies, in pulpits, in policies, in daily choices, in silent apostasies. The battlefield would be the human heart. And today, more than a century later, the world bears the marks of that prophecy. We are not just distracted, we are disoriented, lost not by absence of belief, but by an overload of conflicting truths. Our society exalts self-expression, but forgets self-sacrifice. We celebrate tolerance while silencing conviction. And faith is no longer attacked by persecution alone. It is eroded by irrelevance. Evil no longer screams in the streets. It smiles in screens. It does not desecrate altars. It redefines them. It doesn't deny God. It rebrands him, distorting his image until even believers are unsure of whom they worship. And in the midst of this spiritual confusion, a new pope ascends. Robert Francis Prevost, a quiet cardinal, an Augustinian American, known for his contemplative heart and theological firmness. To the world, perhaps an unlikely choice, but to those who have been watching the signs, perhaps a deliberate one. Not a revolutionary, not a disruptor, but a sentinel, a guardian placed at the gates, not to shout, but to watch. Because some battles are not won by commanding crowds. Some are won by standing still when others fall. Prevost has not claimed visions. He has not thundered prophecies. But heaven does not always speak in noise. Sometimes its silence is its loudest cry. The saints have often said, when God grows silent, he is preparing something. And today the silence is thick. It hangs over the church like fog over a battlefield. We see glimpses, rising numbers of exorcisms, a renewed hunger for tradition, a surge in Marian devotion, a revival of spiritual warfare prayers. The church, though wounded, is stirring. Something ancient is waking. The faithful are beginning to whisper again the name they had forgotten, Saint Michael, because deep down, we know the war never stopped. It simply became harder to see. The devil has not changed his mission. He's only changed his costume. And now, with a new pontiff seated on Peter's chair, the stage shifts again. The silence speaks. The signs multiply. And for those who remember Leo XIII's vision, one question grows louder than all others. Has the final phase begun? The church is distracted, but hell is not. The enemy has never lost focus. He prowls, he waits, he adapts. And that is why St. Michael's prayer is returning, not as tradition, but as necessity. Not because we remember the past, but because we are about to face its fulfillment. Because behind the rituals, behind the appointments, behind the headlines, there is a whisper from long ago. The time granted to the enemy is not eternal, but it is real, and perhaps it's almost over. Few know this, but after his vision, Pope Leo XIII didn't simply write a prayer. He gave an order. The prayer to Saint Michael was to be prayed aloud after every single Mass, without exception, without delay. He wanted the faithful to know, to remember, to never be distracted by the illusions of the world. But time passed, and with it, silence. The prayer was removed. The liturgy became quieter. The people became more confused, and within the church, cracks began to appear. Divisions, scandals, controversies. as if the prophecy was not a warning, but a timeline. Yet, there's one thing Satan has never understood: the power of grace. Because even when the church is bleeding, even when faith seems weakened, there is always a remnant, a small people, often hidden, often unnoticed, but faithful, unshaken, and that remnant began to pray again. Not because they were told to, but because they felt the call. And now, with a new pope stepping into the chair of Peter, at a time marked by spiritual fatigue and confusion, the question returns, louder than before. Is the time granted to the enemy coming to an end? Perhaps that is why so many eyes are turning back to heaven, why so many churches are restoring images of Saint Michael, sword raised, why so many videos, stories, and testimonies are surfacing again, resurrecting forgotten visions and warnings, not because of fear, not because of fanaticism, but because something in the heart of the faithful knows. The signs are repeating. And if there's one thing tradition teaches us, it's that God never allows His people to walk blindly into darkness. Before every trial, He raises watchmen. Sometimes an angel, sometimes a prophet, sometimes a pope, and sometimes it's you. Because spiritual warfare doesn't require a title. It requires faith, prayer, resistance. And that's why this story matters. Because the vision of Pope Leo XIII was never a myth. It was a summoning. If you feel something stirring within you, if your spirit senses that this is more than just history, leave a comment below. What do you believe this battle looks like today? And if you want to go deeper, don't stop here. Click on one of the two videos now appearing on your screen. Both are directly connected to what you just heard. They will take you even further into the mystery, because the battle is not over, and heaven is still calling. If the vision of Pope Leo XIII was real, if what he saw was truly a glimpse into the invisible war, then the enemy's time is limited, and perhaps it's almost over. But don't expect fire from the sky. Don't wait for an angel to appear in a public square holding a flaming sword. What is coming, what is already here, is subtle. It is silent. It is spiritual. The attack will not be against buildings of stone, but against consciences, against families, against vocations, against the very identity of being Christian. And that is why the prayer to Saint Michael has never been more urgent, not as a nostalgic tradition, but as a cry for help in modern times. Because the battle isn't just for the church, it's for every soul, every baptism, every child yet to be born. Leo XIII understood that, and he left a legacy, a spiritual weapon that many have forgotten. But if you've made it this far, it's because you feel it too. You sense that something lies beneath the surface, that there is a battle happening, that something sacred is under threat and must be defended. And maybe that's why Saint Michael has never disappeared from the history of the Church, because as long as there is one heart still praying, Michael fights. As long as there is one altar still standing, Michael stands before it. As long as there is a pope, even if the world doesn't care, Michael still holds his sword. And now, with a new pontiff in place, we may be witnessing a new chapter. Not the end, but the return. The return of vigilance, of prayer, of faith, of spiritual warfare. If this story awakened something in you, leave a comment below. Do you believe we're approaching the final days of this time of trial? Or do you think the vision was merely a distant warning? And if you want to continue this spiritual journey, don't stop here. Click on one of the two videos now appearing on your screen. Both are deeply connected to what you just heard, and they will take you even deeper into the mystery of the invisible battle happening all around us. Because while evil works in silence, faith must learn to shout.